Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Light Reading Podcast. Before my voice cracks again, my name is Phil Harvey. I'm an editor at Light Reading.
I'm Kelsey Zeiser. I'm an editor at Light Reading, and I don't have a good joke about your voice.
It's its own joke.
And I'm Madi Rogers. I'm the director of Civic Innovation at the City of South Bend, Indiana.
Madi, thank you for joining us. And apologize that I'm just going through puberty all over again. It's something completely unexpected.
And better late than never.
Yeah, you know, it's that boyish face that comes with the price at some point. No, thank you for being on the podcast. We've got since this is your first time joining our show, and of course we've chatted in the past, but I'd love for you to give our audience a bit of background on what you do in the city of South Bend, and then kind of, the overall picture of how things are going in terms of broadband access, and then kind of digital divide access post, COVID recovery. That might be too much for one single sentence, but give it a shot.
I'll try my best. I can start with my job, my portfolio of work. So I operate within the Department of Innovation and Technology at the city. And my division is, I like to call it the sandbox of technology innovation for city projects. We lead a lot of grants. We lead a lot of external partnerships and a lot of pilot programs. And those are typically within buckets of workforce development, transportation equity, and digital equity is a huge piece of this division. So we have been working within the digital equity space, as most everybody has, since the start of COVID. In 2022, I believe, is when we had hired for the first time a full-time technology equity manager within my division. So we have somebody whose sole job and sole portfolio is to help to close the digital divide that we see in South Bend. But work has even preceded that technology equity manager. We have been working with some local organizations to provide hotspot lending to the local schools. We have been, we threw up a private LTE network to also help close the gap for at-home internet. We have digital literacy classes. We have been pulling together a lot of infrastructure investments and organizations that are in and around the broadband space. We have a regular meeting called the South Bend Connectivity Coalition that we brought together. So there's a lot of little things going on in this space to add up to that brings together that portfolio of the technology equity manager within this division.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, that was I think the very first time we talked, it was at one of the Smart Cities events. I believe the one in Columbus, and I don't remember the year. But I do remember you were what was intriguing about what you were talking about at the time, and I'm not sure how far along it was, but you guys were talking about you were one of the cities that had equipped buses with roving Wi-Fi so that they could reach these areas where people were lacking good internet access. They couldn't get their schoolwork done. They were, needing to be connected for all kinds of reasons, and the infrastructure just wasn't in place yet. And I thought that was one of the more interesting, approaches to getting, kind of mobilizing internet access and putting a Band-Aid on a problem that was sort of brought to the forefront when everyone was sort of in COVID lockdown.
Yeah, those school buses, we just call it the bus Wi-Fi. That program started very shortly after COVID. It started at the end of spring 2020. And we, by no means were necessarily the first school corporation to do it, but we did get a lot of national recognition for that, which has led to now the funding at the federal level that supports school technologies called E-rate allows for and encourages investments in bus Wi-Fi, which was not the case before. It was funded through internal dollars at the local school corporation. And then we also had an investment of funds from some CARES Act money that came through the state that also helped to expand that bus Wi-Fi program. Yeah, that was in summer of 2020. Those buses would just park along streets and in cul-de-sacs, even during the summer when kids weren't in school. There was obviously still a huge need for at-home internet access, not just for students, for the entire family. So it was really fascinating to see a lot of recognition for that particular work that I give completely to the school corporation. That was actually before my time, but really, really cool to see the school corp be such an innovator in that particular space that now has lasting impacts with E-rate allowing those kinds of purchases these days.
Yeah, I think that's where those kind of projects kind of, when they prove their utility in the community and they solve a real problem, it's definitely incumbent on our government to, you know, reward that effort, fund it, um, provide ways for it to keep going because there were so many little sort of fits and starts in the months after the COVID lockdown of different cities trying things, but there was no like federal level or widespread uniform approach to it. And we're kind of seeing the same thing, unfortunately, with just digital equity, digital education, and then internet access generally. When we first started our Divide podcast that Nicole handles so well, we were thinking this might last a year or so, and it's going on what 4 or 5. It's got a lot of episodes, and if you ever want a good folks listening, if you ever want a treasure trove of stories about different aspects of the digital divide, please do give that a listen. It's on the same feed, and there's plenty to dig into there. Let's see. Now, more recently, we talked at the Smart Cities event in Raleigh in May.
Mhm.
What was your impression of the event there in terms of uh, what your agenda was specifically, and then also what did you make of all the AI chatter? Because that it kind of thematically that kind of took over. Uh, the program, I think, in terms of, it was top of mind for a lot of people and definitely a different direction that the last Smart Cities show I had been to, had started in.
Oh yeah, I think if not every majority of keynote speakers were talking about how their program, their products, their field was centric around AI. It was very funny to learn about how AI is integrating into everyday speak. AI seems to encompass everything from an if statement to complex, large language models that we're making decisions off of. So it was very interesting to be a part of that conversation. Um, what I am most interested in, and I didn't take a lot of this away from the Smart Cities conference, but at least in the world of AI being more introduced into our everyday speak, we are really interested in helping to develop curriculum and opportunities for people who are still stuck in the digital divide, or people who are in hourly wage jobs or more manual labor jobs. How can we upskill these people to not just be a part of the 21st century economy, but be a part of that bleeding line of AI being incorporated into everyday tasks. For people who are already on the cutting edge of technology, people who are in this space, the technologists, the data scientists, the applications developers, they are familiar with and comfortable, or at least saying that they're familiar with and comfortable with AI, and we're learning how to embrace it. And it seems to just be widening the gap for the residents that just 4 years ago didn't even have Wi-Fi, didn't have a
Yeah.
computer. So we were already behind, that we're trying to catch up, and now we're trying to catch up with in exponential growth in this difference between the types of jobs and skills that people need in today's.
Mhm.
I
Does this conversation around AI have an impact or change South Bend's digital equity roadmap at all? And also, can you talk a little bit about what that roadmap is?
Yeah, we have not yet spoken about the implications of AI in our digital equity roadmap. That's actually a good note. I should readdress it. We typically have been coming back to that roadmap at least every 6 months to update our goals. Our digital equity roadmap, which you can find at southbendin.gov/digital equity, is was produced in it's the fall of 2022, I believe we released it, and it is a exactly a roadmap. It's not necessarily a plan. It's not an outline. It's an active updating document that we are using to guide the portfolio of our digital equity and our technology equity manager. We pull up at least once a month. We pull up the digital equity roadmap and we say what are our projects happening in each of these items this month. So this roadmap gives a baseline from when we produced it in 2022, a baseline of what digital equity means for South Bend. And then it lists the different activities and initiatives that the city is taking on, or the city is partnering with local and national organizations to address, and then gives some metrics and timelines to those initiatives and those goals. And that's why we do come back to it at least every 6 months
Mhm.
to update our progress on that. Yeah, so it's actually, this is a good reminder for me too, that some of the data on here is from 2020, and we have seen significant changes in some of these percentages regarding digital access, broadband access, at home internet. So that's something I should probably be updating at least that baseline.
Mhm. I think it is interesting, though, that you have that data there that breaks out in comparison to some other regions, broadband subscriptions, residents with a fiber provider, and then computing device. I think that kind of ties into that page, which we'll link to in the show notes, also mentions digital inclusion. Can you talk about what some of the key, I mean, we've kind of touched on it a bit here already, but what some of the key aspects are to digital inclusion? Because a lot of times I think immediately I think of divide as addressing just broadband access, but there's so much more to it than just access. So
Oh
that
yeah.
was a yeah. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so much more. The first step, though, is access. Um, we typically we do prefer broadband in the home. When we talk about access, we're talking about usually at home access. Um, we also do have an investment in what we call South Bend Open Wi-Fi, which is public infrastructure to provide Wi-Fi in public spaces. That we have tripled our footprint since 2020 in our South Bend Open Wi-Fi. But when we talk about access, we are really prioritizing at-home access. That's first step. We hope that it's broadband for everybody, but we are also, for people that may be uncomfortable with broadband because they may be unfamiliar with it, they may not be able to afford it, especially now that the Affordable Connectivity Program is gone.
Mhm.
We're also still pushing for at-home access via our hotspots, our private LTE network that students can hop on, or mobile data. So the first step is absolutely access, and then the second step is a device to optimize that access. We do see a lot of people using their mobile phones to access any online resources, which is sufficient for some things and insufficient for participating really in the 21st century economy. You can't have a remote job from your phone. You may not be able to effectively engage in online education and telehealth and job opportunities from a mobile phone. So we are working towards device access, at least in the form of tablets, ideally in the form of a desktop or a laptop computer. So access first to internet, then access to a device, and then finally the skills to actually utilize that device. I have personally experienced providing laptops to residents, feeling all good and fluffy about providing this access to this person, and then they open it up and they have never seen or used a keyboard before.
I was
How
gonna say, are they like, well, where's the But I've worked with folks before that, I remember just quickly walking into an office and a coworker was, pressing the buttons on the monitor, and she's like, "My computer won't turn on." I was like,
That's just the monitor.
that's your
Yeah.
monitor." So, I
Yeah.
imagine you have plenty of those types of stories of, "No, that's not the
And
button
Yeah.
you're
Kelsey for
working."
anonymizing the story and making it sound like that wasn't me, but that's nice of you.
I was like, "Now, Phil, we've talked about this."
Right. Right. But we do see that all the time. I one of my the most common thing that I see when I'm sitting with a resident and I'll tell them to go to southbendin.gov, they will open up their texting app, or they may they'll Google southbendin.gov, which will still get you there. But I want to be able to upskill people to understand what the URL is versus the Google search is. That's the kind of baseline that we're working with. So you need those digital skills, and learning how to Google is just the first step. That's not even talking about using different programs, or
Mhm.
navigating the technology of turning on your camera or your audio, navigating the different, I don't know, PC versus Mac. There's so much in this space, and you don't need to know everything, but opening a laptop and not being familiar with the keyboard is definitely a huge gap that is the first thing we need to be addressing.
Yeah, I see your I see the point about digital equity being an issue with especially with telehealth, because just in my own extended household, um, there might be two or three different health portals or providers that we have to access throughout the year. And I don't think any of them work completely over the phone. I think they all have an app component to it, but you have to kind of do the initial setup and engagement on a PC
Mm-hmm.
or a larger device, and then the way you get from putting your information in to connecting to the doctor or the specialist, in the thing, is a completely different set of steps. Some of them will use an application, some of them will use a browser. Like you said, some of them you have to have some literacy to be able to just go, okay, how do I turn my camera on? How do I make sure this application sees that the camera's on? So on and so forth. It's it dawned on me as I was, helping others in my family do this, that are pretty, literate about this sort of thing. I'm like, this stuff just isn't simple enough yet. It's not intuitive enough yet. And the fact that grr, shaking my fist, all the providers insist on using a completely different way to do it.
Yeah.
It's like when you go to the grocery store, and every single grocery store or store in our area, you look down at the payment pad and they're all completely different. It's like some of them tap, some of them don't, some of them swipe, some of them you have to insert your card.
That's
You
so
know,
frustrating for me. I feel so silly with, like, with the tap, 'cause, uh,
yeah,
I never know where to do it, and then the
I'm just
cashier
throwing
is
my
always like,
phone on things.
"It's right here." Exactly, yeah, I feel like I'm just, like, trying to beat up the,
yeah.
the registers, like, "Take my money."
But
Yeah,
it's
it's
a good analogy for how the healthcare infrastructure sort of connects to consumers. Is it's like you just, yeah, the devices, will all get you there, but you never know what to expect once you're connected. And so yeah, there's definitely a skills gap between just getting that raw connectivity, getting the device, and then being able to actually apply it and use it. And I think in terms of um, filling out things like health paperwork and even job applications, there are quite a few, um, you know, resume services and things like that that also insist on you being connected to a larger device, something
Hmm.
like a phone. And so that can be a challenge, because I know this comes up a lot, but it's like people will say to us, sort of like, when you talk about internet access, why don't you just, aren't people, isn't everything good enough with the phone? And it's like, it is in some countries, but in the US, it's really not. It's like we're kind of a desktop society, and
Mhm.
Hmm.
we're just, getting more and more mobile all the time, but we're definitely not there yet. I too will also worry about what people hear about AI and uh, how that might intimidate them from even starting the learning process. Because, as we saw with the Apple announcements the past week or whatever, the actual application of this stuff is going to be pretty Mickey Mouse for a few years. It's going to be pretty much just like, hey, look at my calendar and do a thing, or don't,
Yeah.
as usually happens. Um, and and so it's going to be, I would say, on the whole, simplified to harmless for most people, but just the specter of it getting super complex, or them, kicking off a series of steps they can't rein back in. Um, I think that gets, that sticks in people's mind too, and they might be, um, just afraid to even get going. I'm just picturing somebody opening a laptop for the first time and going, "Now what?"
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. And then imagine having to explain to them AI and then say, no, AI is not going to take over your job.
right.
It's
Yeah.
you can't in the same breath teach somebody about what a URL is and then also reassure them not only that AI is safe in these particular applications, but also here's how you can use it, here's how you can access it, and here's how we can learn from it so that you can improve your job opportunities and trajectory. But first, we need to learn how to use a computer.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a very large gap, but we have um, in South Bend, we have plans and a lot of grant applications in the works to bring some of that programming here so that we, again, don't continue to widen the gap that we see.
So we definitely know inclusion is and education is a component there. About the broadband access piece itself, you mentioned there had been some gains in that area. How does that, what type of gains has South Bend made in terms of connecting residents to broadband? And then I'll follow that up with a question about middle mile networks, because that's also become a hot, a hot issue for us.
Yeah, so we have seen, especially in the past few years of working with the NTIA to finalize those broadband maps. If you look at the NTIA maps, the FCC maps, you'll see that majority of South Bend is serviced. So the widest gap that we see, I mean, we are technically an urban area. We're a small, mid-sized city of about 100,000, in fairly dense single-family homes in the majority of South Bend, and most of them are serviced by some kind of provider. So the gap that we see is in affordability. And again, especially now that affordable connectivity program is gone, we're working a lot to try to close that gap by assisting residents in applying and subscribing to other benefit assistance programs to free up some of those costs to enroll in some kind of at-home internet plan. Very fortunate that the majority of providers kept their same ACP offerings available even without ACP funding. But that's what we're working through right now is a lot of case management with residents to ensure that they still stay connected. Or if they don't, if they choose to not stay connected, then we have their phone number to keep them updated if ACP ever comes back online.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess we should jump straight to, well, let me ask about the middle mile networks. How big of um, a component of that was, or how much work was needed, in the middle mile when it comes to improving connectivity in South Bend? Because we're sort of hearing that from other metros and from telcos themselves. Post pandemic, that was one of the biggest areas that they immediately needed to address in terms of federal dollars, but also just aging infrastructure that suddenly
Mm-hmm.
wasn't good enough, because it was like, hey, maybe in some areas the connectivity situation wasn't too bad, but the amount of traffic going over those networks was exponentially more than they had expected, and so they needed to address that. Was there any kind of insights related to that from South Bend?
So in South Bend, we do not have a middle mile residential network, but we do have a middle mile network for businesses and anchor institutions. We are very fortunate to have an entity here in, believe they're generally in the northern Indiana region. They span a few counties. It's an entity called ChoiceLight, and they are a dark fiber network provider. So they are the middle mile network. They service the city of South Bend. They service University of Notre Dame. Um, they service our healthcare systems, our libraries, and our schools. We did put together an application for NTIA's Middle Mile Grant Program with an eye to expanding that dark fiber network to residential areas, especially the residential areas where we have seen a lack of investment or, in some cases, a disinvestment in bringing fiber to the home. We unfortunately didn't receive that grant, but we do have all of these plans that we produced. That was also in 2022, I believe. We have a lot of these plans to develop this middle mile network. We have some local ISPs that are interested in investing and hopping on that network, and we're waiting for the perfect investment to move forward some of those plans because the plans that we created are targeting neighborhoods again that we're disinvested in from all different angles, and we project that larger companies, larger ISPs or smaller ISPs may not be able to make the argument, the take rate argument to go into these neighborhoods. The idea of building out this middle mile network for residential will hopefully attract that kind of investment by decreasing those costs, and therefore again offer fiber and offer better internet to these neighborhoods that may not see that kind of investment that we see in more affluent neighborhoods for years to come.
Yeah, I think it's worth making the argument too. If any telcos are listening to this, or anyone, ISPs looking at this as opportunities, it's post COVID. One of the realities we're seeing when we travel around the country is not that is that the commercial and the residential sector are not the same as they once were. Those lines were pretty heavily redrawn in most cities when people started working from home more, and working remotely more, and then just launching their own businesses and their own pop-ups and storefronts and things like that. So the soaring cost of real estate actually has changed the face of some cities, where you will see quite a bit more business activity happening in a formerly residential neighborhood. And so my advice, I guess, if anybody's listening to it, is just to make sure don't dismiss residential as just residential. There's an awful lot going on there. You have to kind of, walk around the neighborhood and ask a few people what's happening, because I think that people might be surprised, just how much residential space is ending up in old lofts and
Mm-hmm.
formerly zoned as corporate areas, and how much business activity is happening in formerly residential neighborhoods, in terms of home businesses, media studios, podcasting, and things like that.
Yeah, I project that's a story you'd see in a lot of Rust Belt cities like South Bend. We have significant blight, dilapidated buildings that, fortunately, in the past few years, we've seen some really cool investment into turning these buildings around and creating unique spaces out of them. We have one building on the west side that used to be an old bakery, not tiny bakery. It was a large production, and it's
Commercial one.
being reworked um, into retail space with some lofts and residential on the top floor. And it's in the middle. It's kind of in a transitional period from residential into a commercial-ish area, but it was mostly industrial area before, which presents a lot of opportunity again for ISPs to invest in and around that area. So we see that in South Bend a lot. I'm across the street from an old Studebaker factory that's being renovated. So I know that other Rust Belt cities are looking to do the same and are turning around different areas that were differently zoned, and they're repurposing them and reclaiming the blight that once took over this city. We're now
Yeah.
redeveloping and making it better.
Yeah, I always worry when people make those decisions on paper alone. It's like, no, you really have to physically go there these days. It's completely different on the ground than what you might think.
Mm-hmm.
Kelsey, you were about to say something.
Oh yeah, I think we're coming up on time. So just to wrap up, we touched on this briefly, but what are your thoughts on, how will South Bend shift gears with the ACP funding ending? What are your plans for next? I suppose to continue to, provide affordable access.
Well, in the short term, we have been fortunate enough to keep on some navigators that were originally paid for by a few ACP grants that we received, ACP outreach grants. When those closed down, beginning of February, I believe, we were fortunate enough to have funding to continue supporting those navigators, and therefore those navigators went out into the community and helped people with this transition.
Mhm.
So that's our short term between now and closer to the end of the year is helping people transition from not having to pay an internet bill for a few years, or in some cases never having an internet bill before, trying to help them incorporate that into their monthly billing. Relatedly, we also are spinning up a financial empowerment center with help from Bloomberg Philanthropies, Cities for Financial Empowerment fund. And that center is holistically approaching financial assistance and coaching for low income residents. And digital equity is a large piece of that. Yeah, there's digital equity and digital literacy in a lot of different use cases. For them, they came to us and said, "Hey, we realized that a lot of low income residents um, aren't banked. They don't have access to banks. They don't have their money in banks. And then furthermore, they definitely don't have a banking application. And how are they supposed to learn about that banking application? And how are they supposed to access that at home without Wi-Fi?" So we have a few different initiatives like that Financial Empowerment Center that are tying together our digital equity goals and also our financial empowerment goals. Again, at least in the short term, to help people react to ACP going away. We do have dreams of not necessarily a municipal network, but some kind of digital equity fund that may be able to help support low income residents with paying that internet bill. But that could only come with some infusion of dollars. But that's a big dream. I'm sure I share with a lot of other small to mid-sized cities who are facing the same dilemma.
Yeah, and hopefully the service providers themselves will help out in some of these areas and, continue to honor some of the discounts and, just generally taking a hit on margin so they can do the most important thing, which is keep people connected, and then maybe use a little bit of their lobbying power to talk to our elected officials into getting something passed so that we don't have to put up with this all over again. And if you are
Mm-hmm.
in Congress and you're listening to this, get back to work. Stop. The heck are you doing? Come on. What are we paying you for?
You heard it
Um,
here
I think this
first.
is a fair place to wrap up. Maddie Rogers, thanks so much for being part of the Light Reading podcast. And of course, anything I said on this podcast was my thoughts and opinions alone. So I don't want to get anybody else in trouble.
I'll say the same. I don't want to get in
Fair enough.
trouble either.
Kelsey and I are beyond trouble. We're helpless. But yeah, thanks for being on the podcast. It was great to talk to you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.